On November 21st, 1992, Tom Monfils disappeared after a workplace dispute. A day later, his body was found in a pulp vat with a 50-pound weight wrapped around his neck. Over 30 years later, exactly who killed Monfils remains a mystery. Welcome to the Monfils 6 podcast. My name is Damon Schneider.
My name's Mike Putchell.
This episode is entitled Reflections on the Forewords. So we're going to be diving into the book. The book is The Monfils Conspiracy, subtitled The Conviction of Six Innocent Men. The authors are Dennis Gullickson and John Gay. We talked a little bit about the authors and their involvement with this case. Can you go into that a little bit, Mike?
Sure. So, this book had been a work in progress for many years. And we mentioned last time that Mike Piaskowski's older sister, Francine, was at one time married to John Gay. But they were not married during the time of the writing. I don't know how long they were married or when they got divorced, but there is that connection there.
Needless to say, there could be some conflict of interest because of this involvement. Do you think that they laid out a fair and even case within the book?
I do, because they looked at it from multiple perspectives, and they laid out quite a few alternative scenarios that even the police didn't offer, or really anybody else.
So today we want to talk about the two forewords within the book, specifically Cal Monfils' foreword and Mike Piaskowski's foreword. So we'll start with Cal. So Cal was Tom's younger brother. How does Cal come across to you, Mike, overall in regards to this case?
He seems pretty objective. I obviously being family, you're going to have a bit of a bias, but I thought in his foreword, and then when we saw him in the documentary that was released earlier this year, he seems to be pretty reasonable, not overwhelmed by anger or any emotions because of the death of his brother, so he seems pretty even-keeled.
I think he comes across to me as someone who's interested in knowing the ultimate truth in regards to this case. Mm-hmm. Cal believes that Tom's death is still a mystery. So as they started to write this book, in his foreword, he believes that basically Tom's death has not been solved. What do you think he means by that?
Well, I think he certainly thinks that there's doubt there. He's not convinced by the original convictions from 1995. He mentioned in his foreword that when the convictions were brought down, he still felt like a sense of emptiness and that, things weren't really fully finished. And I think part of that is just the fact that there really is no true resolution to it when somebody's killed. But I think it's also that he's not entirely convinced by the argument that Zakowski, the DA, put forward.
And that brings us to a second main point that Cal makes in his foreword, in that he believes Dennis and John have done a better job with the case than the Green Bay Police Department themselves. What do you make of that point in terms of him saying that the authors of the books actually did a better job investigating than the police department?
Well, I think it says a couple things. I mean, one, it would say the the belief he has in the low quality of the investigation of the police. He made that pretty clear. I mean, he even said that what a terrible investigation process. That's a quote from his foreword. So he doesn't have much faith in the Green Bay Police Department's investigation. But then it shows too that, I mean, these authors spent about 7 years working on this book. So they rounded up information from a lot of different sources, interviewed multiple different people, pretty much anybody who was willing to be interviewed about this case, they talked to. So I think that's where Cal's coming from.
Yeah, the authors truly did leave no rock unturned in terms of the research of this book. Mike Piaskowski's forward now. This book, in essence, is sort of Mike's story in some respects. Can you tell me a little bit about your copy of the book and who actually signed it?
Sure. So the book, you bought it for me, and where did you pick that up from?
Just
Okay.
Amazon.
So yeah, I guess I thought you knew this, but I remember when I told you, you were surprised. But it says on the front page, it says to Dan, and quote, with liberty and justice for all, and all is underlined and in caps. And you believe it's signed by Mike. I can't tell, just the signature's not easily legible, but it's probably signed by Mike in 2010.
Check out our Instagram page, the Monfils 6 Podcast, to view a photo of that. So Mike Pye, as he likes to be called, he basically states that the case destroyed the lives of 6 innocent men and their families. Can you elaborate in terms of the family aspect of that point?
Sure. So, I mean, when you have a case like this where you have 6 defendants and even if they weren't proven guilty, this would still be a huge setback in their lives. But the fact that they were proven guilty and then incarcerated for, almost 3 decades, this is something that really probably ruins families, I would imagine. I mean, I know some of them. Mike is one of them. His father passed away while he was in prison. I'm sure there were a lot of family members of the defendants who passed away while they were in prison. So that's one aspect of how families are ruined. But, of course, a lot of these defendants have kids of their own. I think a few of them were already adults. But I know that the youngest defendant, Mike Hearn, had a younger kid because he was the youngest of all the defendants, and he didn't get to be around. He didn't get to see his kid grow up, and his kid didn't have him around as a father figure. So, those are just examples of how families are completely disrupted from this. And then there's also the financial component where they go into it, especially for Mike Piaskowski, but I would imagine all of the families, hiring the attorneys, posting bail if they were able to. This really just took a major toll on their finances. I mean, some people's life savings were depleted in this process.
And now for a quick break. Memento mori. Remember, you must die someday. However, your life can be remembered forever by contacting us at seasonsoflifememorials.com. We are here to teach you how to create a film about your life that can be seen at your future gravesite, as well as within the obituary section of your very own newspaper. Contact us today at seasonsoflifememorials.com. Mike, can you tell us a little about the Seasons of Life photo montage?
Sure. So the Seasons of Life photo montage is, I'd say, the foundation of the whole business. It's kind of what got it started. It's the centerpiece product offering, I would say. So the photo montage is somewhat like what you'd see at a funeral service where they show photos, but it's a little more in depth. There's a little bit more quality behind it. And the way it works is that it kind of follows along with the seasons of the year. So springtime is kind of where it starts. So that kind of showcases the time from the individual's birth up until young adulthood, so about 18 or 20. And then, interspersed with these photos would be photos of the season. So spring and then summer. Summer goes into adulthood, young adulthood, and entering into, 20s, 30s. And, when oftentimes people start families. And then we move into the fall, and that's getting into more middle-age times and getting closer to like retirement age. And then we've got winter scenes, which is beyond retirement age, and then going into elderly ages. And again, all the seasons are kind of interspersed. Photos of the seasons are interspersed with the photos of those times in the individual's life. And then finally, there's a bit of a fifth season, which is kind of like the melting of the winter snows, where it kind of picks up where the individual's life ended, which shows what that individual left behind. So the grandchildren, if they had any, or just their life's work, what they've accomplished through their life, is shown in those last fifth season photos. And then throughout this whole thing is a original score to go along with it, so it makes it another layer of uniqueness to the video.
And we're back. So another point that Mike makes is this case is the largest miscarriage of justice in the state of Wisconsin history. So again, this was filmed. Book was written before the Making a Murderer case had come out, Netflix's series. But I think it still holds up as being even a bigger story than Making a Murderer. What are your thoughts, Mike?
Well, as far as the Making a Murderer comparison, I actually don't really know much about that case. I never watched that documentary. And, with Stephen Avery, I don't even remember if was that the whole point of that show, is that he may or may not be innocent? Is it a similar comparison?
It's trying to prove that Stephen Avery was innocent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, again, I don't know the details of that story, but I think one reason that this case is surprisingly overlooked is just the fact that this is 6 people. It's not one like Stephen Avery, although I know he did have the other guy, the family member. I don't remember if that was his nephew or something. But this is 6 people, and they were all tried under the same trial. So I think that makes it more of a story.
State of Wisconsin versus Michael Piaskowski. We, the jury, find the defendant, Michael L. Piaskowski, guilty of the offense of first-degree intentional homicide.
Mike Pye was released 5.5 years later by Judge Myron Gordon for a lack of evidence. So who was this judge that let him go?
I believe he had been, he was the senior federal district judge for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. But other than that, I don't know really too much information about him. Do you?
I just know the fact that he looked over the case. He looked through it, and he basically had come to the conclusion that there was no evidence to hold Mike with. And if it hadn't been for Judge Myron Gordon, Mike Piaskowski could very well have ended up spending another 15, 20 years behind bars. So one of the things that Mike Pye does in the foreword is he thanks the judge. This is one person that, just looked at the case with an objective eye and realized that the DA had gone way too far, especially in charging all 6 of these people at the same time. So what is a writ of habeas corpus?
Yeah, like I said in the last episode, I'm not really familiar with the legalese of it, but I know that it's something that's granted extremely rarely, and it's the last resort in many ways, it sounds like to me. And he mentioned there's a quote from the judge saying that it's a grave remedy reserved for grave occasions, and this is an occasion. So he felt that this was one of those rare, 1 in a million maybe situations where habeas corpus is called for.
It is granted very, very rarely, for sure. Again, that a lot was riding on this judge's decision. Eventually, it was upheld by another judge. Because the evidence was not sufficient to support his conviction, the double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment bars a retrial. Why is that important?
Well, I think it shows that, Mike, who is a crucial part of the book and a pretty outspoken player in this whole saga, he was in the documentary quoted there too. I think it shows that, he's not hiding anything. There's really there's no reason to not be truthful.
Yeah, that's sort of the next point, is the fact that Mike can no longer be tried for what he says in regards to this case. So if he had extra knowledge, why wouldn't he just come forward and state it? Because he can no longer be tried.
Mm-hmm.
What about Mike's background as a Vietnam vet? He kind of mentioned that he had felt like the legal system had let him down because he had served the country. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought that was a particularly moving, I guess, part of his foreword, because I've got it right here. I'll read part of it. He said that never had I felt as lost and hopeless as when being led out of the courtroom in chains. For all practical purposes, my life's journey was over. Intensified by the uncertainty of its end, I secretly wished it were. And, just prior to that, he talked about defending the country with honor in Vietnam. So, I think this really this is devastating. He worded that very eloquently, and I think he mentioned too how just the fact, just being accused of this was devastating enough to him. And, he said just the thought of being wrongly accused of such a heinous crime was pretty devastating. And again, that's just being accused. So he was eventually convicted. So I can understand and empathize there with how he would feel like his world's just completely turned upside down on him.
Another key aspect that Mike Piaskowski brings up in the foreword is the fact that he believes that the United States has the best legal system in the world, except for the death penalty. Now, Wisconsin does not have the death penalty, but if Wisconsin had the death penalty, do you think the Monfils Six would, at least certain members of them, face the death penalty for Monfils' death?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't really know because, the jury would have to decide whether they would sentence them to death or just life in prison. And also the district attorney would, they can ask for the death penalty. Not everybody is just sentenced to death automatically. A lot of times the district attorney for the local area requests it. And, I don't know if Zukowski would have asked for that in this case. We'll talk later about his views on the case, but, there's not a lot of heft to the evidence presented against these defendants. So I don't know if he would have asked for the death penalty. And then, let's say that they were convicted and sentenced to death. With the way the death penalty works in other states, and I'm no expert on it, but you hear all these stories about people who die on death row. They've been on it for 20, 30 years. So, who knows if it doesn't necessarily mean they'd be dead now as a result of the death penalty. It takes so long for it to actually happen.
That's a good point as well. That a lot of times people who are on the death row are on death row until they're very old men.
What's remembered lives. Losing someone precious from our lives is the most painful event that one can endure. Seasons of Life Memorials is dedicated to making sure the person you lost is never forgotten. We work with you to help you craft a film about your loved one's life that can be viewed at the gravesite. We can also help you create a film about your very own life that can be viewed in the obituary section of your hometown newspaper. Imagine that, your friends, relatives, and neighbors viewing your own unique story and how your life truly did matter. Visit our website, seasonsoflifememorials.com, and follow us on social media today to start viewing what we can do for you.
Now, it's almost unheard of to have a higher court overrule a lower court, especially without DNA evidence. So why do you think that this, in terms of this case, that happened?
You mean as far as the lack of DNA evidence?
And the higher court overruling the lower court.
Sure. Well, the lack of DNA evidence, we kind of touched on that a little bit last time, and we'll probably go into it more in the future too, but this is a bizarre case in that regard, how there really isn't a lot of DNA evidence. And I know the police didn't really collect a lot of evidence. They weren't really looking for it. But even if they had collected DNA evidence, there really wasn't a lot to be collected just because of the nature of the way that Tom died. And then as far as the court overturning the lower court, again, I think that speaks to the process of how these convictions were granted. The Judge Gordon, he said here that this ruling, the verdict for Piaskowski specifically, but I'd say for all of them really, but he was just ruling on Mike Piaskowski's verdict. He said that ruling required the jury to pile speculation on top of inferences that were drawn from other inferences, and such a verdict is not rational. So there was just so much speculation and assumptions that, the fact that it's a rare occurrence to me doesn't really matter. It shows how screwed up this whole process was with convicting these people.
A huge decision from a federal judge in Milwaukee today, overturning the 5-year-old conviction of Mike Piaskowski. In this 25-page decision, federal judge Myron Gordon says there is no evidence tying Mike Piaskowski to the murder of Tom Monfils.
And Mike Piaskowski would even go on to say that while the United States has the best legal system in the world, it does make mistakes. There are always mistakes that are going to occur. Mm-hmm. And Mike did end up spending 5.5 years in prison, which is no light matter in itself. I remember thinking to myself, Piaskowski went into prison for the entire senior year of my high school and then my entire college career. That was a significant amount of time for a crime that there's a good chance he was not involved with. Mm-hmm. Do we as a society, owe Mike Pye anything for those 5.5 years?
I don't really know how to answer that question, Damon, just because, we as a society, what do you mean by that? Do you mean everybody in the state of Wisconsin? Do you mean members of Green Bay? What do you mean?
Yeah, I would say the people of Wisconsin, the people of Green Bay. What do they owe him? I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast, is to shed light on this matter and these prison sentences, which again were substantial. Mm-hmm. In the end, as the judge said, a rational person, it's hard for a rational person to believe that they were guilty.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'd say, at least to answer your question, what we owe him would be that we just give him our ears and listen to the story and, come to see his side of it and, understand why his conviction was overturned, for good reason. But then I was thinking too, what you meant by owe, and I thought, as far as, righting the wrongs, I think that there should be probably some, perhaps some financial side of it. I'm usually not a fan of saying things like this, but the Green Bay Police Department really got it wrong here, and the DA as well. So I don't know if Mike. I don't remember hearing anything about him as far as a lawsuit against them, but I certainly wouldn't be against some sort of judgment in that regard for righting the wrong there.
New episodes of the Monfils 6 podcast drop every other Friday. Please join us again. Thanks for listening.
Have you recently lost a loved one and want to hold on to their memory forever? Would you like all of the world to view what their life had been about? Seasons of Life Memorials is what you are looking for. We create individual and unique documentary shorts that will allow anyone visiting the gravesite to view the documentary and your memories of the loved one. Contact us today to set up an appointment at seasonsoflifememorials.com.